I'm going to be talking about some of the optional forms today that we use in our contracts. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on. You may or may not use them. They're not part of our, it's not forms that we use every day, like our lead-based paint hazard form. That one tends to get messed up a lot. I don't know why. Most often it comes back incomplete, and then we've got to send it back, and we need check boxes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well as a couple other forms. But before I get into that, is there anything that you guys are dealing with regarding forms that you have a question around? No? Can I jump right in? So let me jump right in and let's talk about some of the optional forms that we have at our disposal that what's the best word, that we may or may not use, right? If you look in the compliance in KW Command and Opportunities, you'll see a lot of these forms are not required. They're optional forms, but they may be forms that you want to include in a transaction. So let me share my screen here, and I'm going to pull up, the first one I'm going to pull up is the is the lead-based paint form. So let me share my screen. All right, everybody see my screen? And up here in this search box, it's really easy to, if you got your template and you're looking for a particular form, use that search box and it pulls up the form rather than trying to scroll through trying to figure out what form you're looking for. So let's look at this one first. This tends to catch agents mostly on the buyer side, but it can also on the listing side, just simply because this is one of those forms, and there's a few of them, where you ask yourself, I've already signed this page, why do I need to initial it again? I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know why. I mean, you'd think that if I initial it here, do I need to initial it to the bottom of page 2? If I signed it here, why am I initialing it right underneath? I don't have an explanation for it. What I can tell you is anywhere where it says signature or initial, it needs to have a signature and initial. And we can argue all day long with the people who make these forms and statewide forms, but the fact of the matter is, for compliance, if it says there needs to be initial, there needs to be initial. If it says there needs to be a signature, we need to have a signature, right? Now, there's a couple things about the lead-based paint hazards form that you need to be aware of. When you're on the listing side and the seller's filling this out, both of these sections, Section A and Section B, are separate. All right, so both sections need to have one of these boxes checked. Section A, you're going to check one of these two boxes. Section B, you're going to check one of these two boxes. A lot of people think that all 4 boxes go together and all you need is one signature or one check box. They're 2 separate sections. So presence of lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards, they're known or the seller has no knowledge. That's the first section. The second section is records or reports. Seller has provided the buyer available records and reports, or the seller has no reports or records pertaining to lead-based paint. Typically, it's the latter 2 boxes, but those have to be filled out, right? And you'll notice that right here on the very first page, seller signs it. And then right down here at the bottom, seller also initials and dates it. And again, I can't explain to you why. That's just the way the form is.
Hey, Ron, I believe the initials are to recognize that the pages are attached, so one goes with the other one, and the signature is verifying that the information is correct and accurate.
Could be, I don't know. To me, it's just weird. All I know is where it says initials, you got to have initials. And so frequently and in fact, I just had this conversation a couple of weeks ago. Well, maybe a month ago now.
The initial is to recognize that the seller signed the form.
Yeah, so I need to initial to recognize that I signed the form. You'll notice on the other side, there's a place for the buyer to initial, right? And then down at the bottom down here, the second page at the very bottom, you've got the listing broker needs to sign, and that frequently gets missed. Both brokers need to initial this. I'm going to explain to you why in here just a minute. So you as the listing broker need to sign it if you're on the listing side, and if you're on the selling side or the representing the buyer, you need to sign it over here. And you'll notice that again at the bottom, seller signs it again, which makes sense because this is page 2, right? So seller needs to acknowledge each page as part of the contract. So that makes sense to me. All right. So you'll notice that this form is a required form for any home, any dwelling that was built prior to 1978. So by state law, this is required for any home that's prior to 1978. Now, let's talk about on the buyer side. Let's say the listing agent, I always have this filled out and I've got it uploaded in Associated Docs. So when the buyer's agent fills out a contract, it's there, they're able to sign it right away, okay? Here's the thing that catches on the other side, here's the thing that catches buyer's agents or selling agents. Is one of these 2 boxes need to be checked. And I can't tell you how many times looking over for compliance in our contracts and compliance, one of these boxes is not checked, probably almost 50-50, right? The first box, waive the opportunity to conduct a risk assessment inspection, or accepted an opportunity to conduct a risk assessment and inspection for the presence of lead-based paint. And then it explains what that's going to look like. One of those boxes need to be checked, right? Most often it's the first one, but it needs to be checked. Buyer needs to at least acknowledge the opportunity to have done that, right? Now, I want you to pay attention to buyers or leasees, because this is also used when some property is being leased or rented. I want you to notice these 3 paragraphs here. C, buyer has received copies of all information listed above. What information is being listed above? What's the information being listed above? Buyers received copies of that. What information is there?
That was the information that said if it was prior to 1978, there's a possibility it had lead-based paint. There could be dangers involved.
Yes, that, and if seller has any records or reports.
Okay.
So buyers acknowledging that the age of the house, that they're aware that there could be lead-based paint hazards here, and whether they've received any records or reports. Paragraph D, buyer has received the pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. This, to me, should always be highlighted. If you're working with a buyer, you need to provide that pamphlet, and that is available in our Washington State forms. And I would recommend, just like we do to prove that you've delivered the law of real estate agency, I would recommend that you have them initial the front page of that and keep that for your files. We don't require that in our files, but they're acknowledging that they've received a copy of that pamphlet.
Hey, Ron, with these like this, let's say you're doing an offer on a house or whatever, and it's all together with the purchase and sale agreement for that house. You don't have to give them another pamphlet. So let's say they've already done 2 other offers on other homes that were 1950, 1960 or whatever. They've already got the pamphlet. Do you have to give them another pamphlet for each one, or do you just say, yes, they received the pamphlet?
Yeah, no, you don't need to. It would be like the law of real estate agency. They don't need to sign it for every contract that you write.
Okay.
You acknowledge it once. So that's a great question, Jeremy.
But
Yeah.
that is uploaded in command on whatever offer they're approved on or whatever. When you go through the docs we have to submit for.
Well, no, we don't. We don't upload the pamphlet.
No, but okay. All right, cool.
Yeah. I think it's a great practice to have them initial the front page and keep a copy of that front page, but we don't require that. Yeah. That makes sense? So that second piece there is huge. And then, of course, they're going to check one of these boxes. And again, you will notice that on the bottom of the page, buyer has reviewed the information above and certifies to the best of buyer's knowledge that the statements made to buyer are true and accurate. And then buyer's going to sign this. And again, buyer is going to initial it at the bottom of the page. Okay. Any questions about this form? No questions? Clear as mud? All right. So you notice that, again, if you go to the top of the page, this is not just for a purchase and sale agreement. This is also for a lease agreement. So this is often used for rental agreements or lease agreements, right? Notice this cancellation rights. A lot of people don't even pay attention to this paragraph. If a residential dwelling was built on the property prior to 1978, buyer may rescind the agreement at any time up to 3 days after buyer receives the disclosure, unless buyer receives the disclosure prior to entering the agreement. Buyer may rescind the agreement at any time up to 3 days after buyer receives the disclosure. So to me, that's why it's really important that you as the listing agent representing the seller get this into the buyer's hands as soon as possible, right? Because once that's delivered, if they've passed that 3 days, then they've essentially waived the right to rescind based upon the disclosure of lead-based paint hazards. Okay? All right. Let me pull this down here. I don't know why it keeps doing that. So let's go back.
Hey, Ron, real quick, the question I had about that you just mentioned, it says, unless the buyer receives this disclosure prior to entering in the agreement at the end of that part, that paragraph, what does that mean? Does that mean like if they've received it just generally when we first start talking to them, or are they, what is that added on at the end? It's like in bold print.
Yes, right. Yeah, so I'm not too certain when this would happen, but it's possible that the buyer could receive this lead-based paint hazard notice before they even wrote up an offer. A lot of times that happens when there's a pre-inspection. We don't do a lot of those over here. They're more common in the other side of the mountains. But sometimes a buyer will do a pre-inspection before they write an offer on a house. And that pre-inspection could include lead-based paint hazard disclosure.
Would this ever be in any of the associated docs on any of the listings?
It should be, but often it's not.
Okay. And if it would that kind of count also as the same thing?
No, it still has to be delivered.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know why it did that. Well, that's kind of weird. Why did it suddenly drew all over my my form there?
It's your artistic side.
Who did that? Somebody did that. Who done that?
I'm going to say it was Katie.
Look at that. Isn't that weird? I've got like this yellow scribble in the middle of my screen.
Definitely wasn't me.
Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Does anybody know how that happened?
Did you click on pencil or something?
I don't know. Unbelievable. Okay, so the next
You click and
option.
highlight. See the highlight thing there
Well,
on the
no.
up there, a little bit higher.
Yeah, up here
That's
is a
what, right?
highlight, but you have to highlight. You have to highlight a section and then click the highlight button, and then it'll do
Okay.
that.
Yeah. No. You didn't do that.
Ron, try undo. See if that does it.
It looks to me like that is. It looks to me like that is something that's in the screen sharing on Zoom. And if that was the case, I believe you can, because you can do notes on the screen sharing.
Right.
So if you go up to the screen share option, you should be able to clear any of the notes.
Oh, you think I clicked on the annotate?
Yeah.
Could be. Because when you scroll the document, it stays in the same spot.
It stays there, yeah.
I know. Isn't that weird? That's just so weird.
Although it's the beginning of a beautiful drawing, Ron, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, here, it's undo right here. That's not.
So that, yeah, because that pencil that's right there, that would do the annotating. So there should be something close to where you click to get that pencil on.
A half an hour
It would
left.
erase those.
I don't know. Anyway, we'll ignore it for now. So the other optional addendum that you could use would be the title addendum. I recommend using this. This is something I always include with every offer, and here is the reason why. In your purchase and sale agreement, it makes provision for the title, but in the boilerplate language of the purchase and sales agreement, all it says is that the seller is going to deliver a marketable title. It doesn't give the buyer an opportunity to review the title report and find out if there's anything on the title that maybe buyer wants addressed. That's the reason for this form. Maybe there's something in the title report that buyer discovers. Maybe it's mineral rights, or maybe it's an easement, or something else. And buyer wants that taken care of before they move toward closing. The way the boilerplate language is written in the purchase sales agreement, all seller has to do is provide marketable title, regardless of what is included on title, right? And so by including this form, you give the buyer an opportunity to, after 5 days, notice I put the date of buyer's receipt of the preliminary commitment. So typically there's 2 or 3 days after the offer's been made and the contract's been sent over to the title company. Title company will do a thorough title report and then send out a preliminary title commitment. You need to go over that with your buyers. You must go over that with your buyers. This gives the buyers 5 days opportunity to review that and see if there's anything in the title report that they can't live with. And again, there could be a number of things. Most often the biggest one has to do with easements and setbacks and things like that. It could deal all with, it also could deal, the other thing that could come up would be covenant restrictions, all right? So it's really important that you do that. Now, this is an optional clause. This is not required in compliance. I think it's best practice that you include this, but we don't require it, okay? Notice that there's a thing about supplemental title reports. So supplemental title, usually you'll get the preliminary title report. You're going to go over that with your buyer. And even on the listing side, I go over that with the seller, make sure that there's nothing in there that maybe the seller needs to take care of. But notice, and then after that, you might get a series of supplemental reports. And I've been in transactions where I've got 3 or 4 or 5 supplemental title reports, right? So if supplemental title reports disclose new exceptions to the title commitment, then the above time period and procedures for notice, correction, and termination for those new exceptions shall apply to the date of the buyer's receipt. So let's say there's a supplemental title report that comes and something else is discovered on title, or something else is discovered to be attached to title. That 5-day period starts over again once that supplemental title has been delivered, all right? So to me, this is an important addendum, but not everybody uses it. And it just depends on how you what your buyer wants to do, but it's important. Notice paragraph number 3, this addendum does not relieve the seller of the obligation to provide marketable title at closing as provided for in the agreement. That's Form 21. That's a purchase and sale agreement, all right? So it doesn't relieve the seller of the obligation to provide marketable title at closing as provided already in the purchase and sales agreement that is in the boilerplate language. Jeremy, you got a question?
Kind of, yeah. You can see the look on my face, huh? So when it gives you the 2 boxes, you can check either from the date of the buyer's receipt or preliminary commitment to for title insurance, or it says mutual exception or mutual acceptance. I have checked the same one that you have checked there, the date of buyer's receipt.
Right. Sure.
When would it make sense to use mutual acceptance? To me, it would be more limiting for the buyer.
It is limiting to the buyer. The only time that it might be acceptable is if the preliminary title report has already been pulled.
Okay.
And is already available. And so that would be the only time I would use that.
Okay.
In our side of the state, that's a very rare practice. Annie Fitzsimmons, our Washington Realtors legal hotline lawyer, says that's something we should regularly do, is always pull preliminary title as of the listing agents. But again, frequently it's not. So it's not even available when the market goes, or when the house goes in the market. And in this market right now, depending on your price range, but in your lower price range, typically they're already under contract before you even got the preliminary title report pulled, because it does take 2 or 3 days for the title company to run, because they do a deep search. I mean, they track the deeds for title all the way back to the beginning, right?
And then counting the days, if you have the 5 filled in like you do there, those are 5 business days, or is that 5 calendar days?
Those would be 5 calendar days. 5 days or less, we don't count weekends or holidays.
Okay.
Okay. And remember, day 1 would start the day after mutual acceptance.
Okay.
So let's say we had a contract signed today, day 1 would be tomorrow. So day 1's tomorrow, Thursday. Day 2 is Friday. We've got a weekend plus a holiday. So day 3 is going to be Tuesday. Day 4 is going to be next Wednesday. Day 5 will be next Thursday.
Okay. And then that would be the same counting if you do like from the date of the buyer's receipt of the preliminary title. If you received it today, counting for the first day starts tomorrow?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So 5 days or more are calendar days, right? So, so like for the inspection period, day 1 starts tomorrow, but we count the weekend, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We don't not count the week. That doesn't make any sense. Don't not count the weekend. That's a double negative, right? Okay. Okay, let's go back. Any other questions around that form before I move on? Okay, another optional form that we use is the homeowner's insurance, right? And again, this is an optional form. Not everybody uses this. I like to use it. I think it's a best practice, but we don't require it, right? So this insurance addendum, it allows the buyer to be able to make sure that they can get the home insured and can afford to get the home insured, right? So notice to buyer concerning homeowners insurance, the availability and cost of homeowners insurance depends on a number of factors, including buyer's personal insurance, buyer's financial and credit history, the condition of the property, buyer's claim history, and the claims history of the property. That last part is huge. Claims history of the property. So you're buying a home You don't know the history of that home, and maybe there's been a series of claims made against that home, fires or flooding or whatever, but you don't know that. This gives your insurance company an opportunity to run a history on that property. Okay? At the time of application, most insurance companies will only issue a binder, which is a temporary commitment to provide insurance and not a guarantee that a policy will be issued. After issuing the binder, the insurance company will take additional time to make a final decision about issuing a policy and the amount of the insurance premium. Accordingly, it's important for the buyer to apply for insurance as early as possible. Right? So right early after mutual acceptance, buyer needs to get a hold of their insurance company, right? So this agreement.
So the cost of the insurance could be affected not by your claims against other properties you might have, but rather the property you're purchasing.
Correct.
That history. Interesting.
Correct.
I did not know that. So it's not like
Yes.
car insurance.
Dude.
Wow, that's okay. I did not know that.
You live out in the county and, you know, a home has experienced fires in the past and has had insurance claims against you. You live in West Richland in the floodplain and, you know, there's been insurance claims against them for flooding. Or maybe you're in an old part of Kennewick or old part of Richland where there's been insurance claims made against a property because of, I don't know, bad electrical or bad sewer, bad whatever. Yeah, so that does affect you, right? And can affect the cost of insurance as well.
So
This agreement's conditioned upon the buyer obtaining a binder for a standard policy of homeowners insurance together with any other property insurance required by buyer's lender. So buyer's lender is always going to require insurance at an annual premium not to exceed 0.5 or 1% of the purchase price. So if your purchase price is $300,000 and your home insurance is going to cost you $4,000 a year. What does this form allow? With the deductible not to exceed $1,000, exclusive of the additional endorsements, declarations and riders, that's jewelry, personal items, things like that. Buyer shall make application of insurance within 5 days of mutual acceptance, and if buyer fails to timely make application, then this contingency is deemed waived. They got 5 days to notify their insurance company to make application. And this insurance contingency shall be deemed satisfied, waived, unless 15 days of mutual acceptance buyer gives notice of inability to obtain a binder on the terms set forth above. If buyer gives such notice, then this agreement shall be terminated. So I think this is an important coverage for buyers, particularly buyers of older homes, buyers of homes that have histories, buyers of homes that maybe live in flood zones or in places where, maybe fire service or emergency service isn't always accessible. My point being that is I just really think that it's an important form to, but it's an optional form. Not everybody includes that. Any questions about this? Is that clear as mud?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
Hey, Ron, could that affect the cost that the buyer would have to pay at closing if the insurance had previous claims that were not really known at the first part of everything? Would that affect the closing costs for the client, or does that affect their the loan amount?
Well, it could affect both. It could affect how much money they're going to have to bring to the table at closing, but it also will affect their loan amount, right? Particularly if their insurance and taxes are included in their monthly payment, right? Their
Right.
monthly payment could suddenly go up to what they can't afford because they want to have that house that's in the floodplain, and to have flood insurance is going to cost them a few $100s more a month, right? The flood insurance is probably the big one around here, and so it's really important that you're aware of homes that can possibly be in flood zones, although that can be weird. We lived in a place in West Richmond up on a hill, and we were considered to be in a flood zone. And seriously, it would have had to have been like a 10,000-year flood in order for the water to reach us. It didn't make any sense to me, and we had to actually go through the whole process with our insurance company to verify that we weren't in a flood zone. Okay. A couple other forms that that may be used. These next two are a little bit more, what's the word? Not necessarily rare, but they're unlike the other forms where they are optional forms that I think you should include. These are truly optional forms that you probably will not use. And the one is the second buyer's addendum form, right? This is when you've got a second buyer in a piece of property, and the buyer is acknowledging that they know that they're in a backup position. So the second buyer acknowledges the property is subject to a prior purchase and sale agreement between the seller and whoever that buyer is, and that the prior sale is contingent on the first buyer entering into agreement for the sale of the first buyer's property. And so the weird thing about this form is the seller, let's say the seller's accepted an offer and they have somebody they want to put in backup position. They can put them in a backup position and have them as a second buyer, but then they can also require them to waive certain things, right? The bump notice will not be given to the first buyer until seller has received notice of the second buyer, the buyer that has presented this offer and is going to be in the backup position, okay, that they've received, that they've approved the seller's disclosure statement, Form 17, that they've approved the second buyer's approval of an inspection of the property, improvements of the property. So this means that they're going to pay for an inspection before they're even in first position. That could happen, particularly if it's a highly competitive market and it's a home that they really, really want. Second buyer's approval of the review of the property to determine if the property can be used in a manner consistent. In other words, they've looked at the property and they are satisfied with it. There's no feasibility study or anything like that. Then it has to do with the condominium resale. They've taken care of their finance addendum, and there could be any other things that the seller puts in there that says, hey, listen, if I'm going to accept you to be a second buyer in the backup position, then these things need to be taken care of before we accept you, right? If the first sale fails and we're in the backup position, this is really important to pay attention to. So let's say I'm in backup position and because my buyer's in backup position and they're a little unsure whether they'll ever, get an opportunity to buy the house. They want to keep shopping. They want to keep out there looking. Maybe they'll find something else, right? This paragraph number 3, within so many days of second buyer's notice that all contingencies selected in paragraph 2 of this addendum have been satisfied, a waive a bump notice shall be given to the first buyer. So now that the seller gives this bump notice to the first buyer and says, hey, I've got a better buyer in backup position, Mr. Seller in first position. And usually that's because they're contingent. And I want you to waive your contingency that you need to sell this other piece of property, or your financing contingency, because I want to accept this other offer. And that's where this bump notice comes into play here. And if the second buyer terminates the second agreement without legal cause after the bump notice is given to first, then the second buyer is in default, which means they give up their earnest money. So you can't put a seller in a position where they have served notice to the first buyer, we're going to bump you, and then decide to get out of contract. That puts the seller at a disadvantage, right? So if your buyer wants to keep on shopping and they find a house, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to send over a withdrawal notice of the backup offer. You're going to withdraw that offer first. And one of the best ways of doing that is if you're going to use this form and be in a backup position, have them also fill out that withdrawal form at the same time, so that you have that in your disposal. And if they find a house they want to write an offer on, you go in there and you immediately send that over to the other agent and withdraw your backup offer. Get that off the table, right? And that gives the freedom to your buyer to immediately enter into a contract with another house that they found that they really, really like, right? The timing of that can be really confusing, and it's really important that you pay attention to that, because what you don't want is your buyer not to have withdrawn from their backup offer position and then all of a sudden have an accepted offer over here because they found another house, and suddenly now they're in an awkward position of being in contract in 2 homes. Now, there's not very many people who can buy 2 homes. That makes sense? Okay. I'm not going to go over the rest of this form. It talks about computation of time and everything like that, but that's the big thing here. And it's an optional form, particularly with our multiple offer situation and things like that is a form that gets used a lot. The last form that I want to talk about is the, will come up here. Is the form that goes along with that, right? The backup addendum to the purchase sales agreement. So seller has previously sold the property pursuant to the purchase sales agreement dated, whatever. Seller reserves the right to change or amend the terms of the first sale. This person in the backup offer doesn't get to dictate any of that. And this backup agreement is subject to the first sale. Seller is not obligated to sell to buyer unless the first sale fails to close, right? So this is the form that typically seller would deliver to buyer. The other form is typically the form that the buyer would deliver to the seller. And that's really the kind of the difference between the two. Again, it's really, really important that if you're representing the backup offer, the seller of that's in the second position, that you really carefully pay attention to those timelines. And if your buyer is still shopping, that you make sure that you have ready to go at a moment's notice that withdrawal of the backup offer in place, so that you can send that over, and that releases your buyer from that first purchase agreement backup position, and they're able to make an offer on a second home, right? Those backup forms need to be, and offers need to be carefully navigated and thought through. Any questions around backup offers or giving backup offers or getting out of backup offers? Any questions around those at all?
Clear as mud.
The other thing to be aware of is in the backup position, as soon as let's say the seller is working with the first buyer and the first buyer's sale falls through. Maybe it's because of the home inspection. Maybe it's because of low appraisal, whatever. As soon as the seller delivers notice to the buyer in the second position, seller in the second position is now under contract. So it's really, really important to be aware of that. And that's typically when timelines start and things like that, okay? So I can't emphasize enough how important it is for you to understand and realize that being a backup offer is can be very strategic and can put you in a really strong position if you're representing a buyer who really wants that house. Because what it does is, if the first one falls through, you're automatically in first position. You're not competing with anybody else. You're automatically in position number one. Now you're taking over the purchase and sales of that home. So there are some instances where that really is the best place for your buyer to be, because they really want this home, and if that first offer falls through, they want to be the first ones to be able to go at it, right? However, having said that, you need to be very cautious and careful about those timelines, the requirements that are on your buyer, and if your buyer is still out there looking around and finds another house, you need to first of all get out of that first contract as a backup offer before you write a contract on the second home that they've found. Okay? I noticed a number of new people on here today. It's great to have you, Jimmy and Jacob and Jess and Stephanie. It's good to have you on here today. Any questions about any of those forms that I've discussed? Again, they're optional forms. They're not going to be forms used all the time. They're forms that are not required for compliance, but they're really important forms that you need to be aware of and know how to use carefully. Remember, when it comes to legal forms in Washington State, we're held to the same standard as any Washington State lawyer when it comes to filling out forms.
I guess this doesn't really have to do exactly with the specific form, but I would imagine that the scenario could happen where you're in that backup position and you talk to your buyers and they're, yes, we really want this home, but we found this home over here. We want to make an offer on this one. You explain to them, or how would that conversation go, that I would imagine there's a possibility of withdrawing from that backup position, doing that offer and not getting that house, or not getting accepted on that other offer.
Right.
And then that would leave them without that backup on the first. So now they're in no position. So how do you do that conversation? What does that look like, aside from just saying, what I just said?
Right. Yeah. Well, again, our job as realtors is to educate and inform, to empower our customers, our clients, to make the best decision for themselves. And so a lot of times that kind of discussion goes around their motivation. How motivated are you to have that house? Do you really want, if that house went away, would you be okay with that and not be brokenhearted? If you really want that house, then we want to stay in the backup position, because as soon as that first offer fails, you will be in the driver's seat and be able to purchase this house. Now, if you want to give up that right, you want to give up that opportunity because this other house really is more appealing, or maybe it has everything the first house wants, whatever. Again, it goes back to their motivation. If they're really motivated to have that second house and they're willing to let that first house go, then fine. But that's kind of the education and informing part of the process as realtors that we do, helping them to think through that. What's that going to look like? And I just had this discussion this last weekend showing houses. If they were thinking that they really needed to make an offer on this home, and I said, well, let's talk about your motivation. If this home was sold tomorrow, how disappointed would you be? And they were both like, not so much. I mean, it wouldn't be the end of the world. And I told them, well, it doesn't sound to me like you're really all that excited about this house. No, not really. Then why waste your time?
So, and then that backup position, would that person be released from that backup position? Does that go all the way until it closes, or is that till final signatures, or what?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as soon as they deliver the withdrawal of backup notice, as soon as they deliver that and that's received, and I want a confirmation from the agent that they received the withdrawal from the backup offer, that they're released from that first contract and they're able to move on to the second one.
Now, do we do that if we're doing the email thing, or we would still need to do that withdrawal to the firm email and also the agent's email?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Yep.
And then if there is no withdrawal, so let's say that they don't withdraw, they continue in the backup position, does that ride all the way until closing, or does that ride all the way until when is it that the seller would now say it's
all the way to closing?
There? Okay.
You remain in the backup position all the way to closing.
And then
this is a long time ago, but I was in a backup position, and it was kind of funny because we were like a week before closing, maybe 2 weeks before closing. It was like, it's going to happen, and my buyers had actually found a place that they were really considering. Thinking, wow, we really kind of like this house, and it doesn't look like this first one's going to happen or whatever. And then out of the blue, I get notified from the agent about the first sale that the appraisal had come in low, and that buyer and seller in the first offer were not able to keep the deal together, and so she was calling me to let me know that it was very possible that we could end up 2 weeks before closing, end up in first position. And so I called my buyers and I said, hey, listen, it sounds like if they can't come to agreement, you could end up being in first position with this house. Are you really serious about this first house, or do you want to go look at the second house? Because if you are, then we need to immediately give withdrawal of notice.
Right.
And they were delighted. They were like, no, we want this house. We want this house. And sure enough, that first deal fell apart. And, here we are 2 days before it's supposed to close. And now all of a sudden we're in first position and they got the house.
Nice.
So it's kind of a crazy situation, but it can happen.
So what happens with contingencies and stuff like that, Ron? In that case, like, let's say the first buyer did their inspection contingency. They went through inspection, did that stuff. They agreed to the work. They're going through the whole thing up until closing. You're in a backup position.
Right.
How would I say it? Are you informed that there was contingencies? Are you informed that there was any work done on the house as things are going along? Or are you basically just sitting there waiting for them to say, hey, it fell through. What do you want to do?
Basically, you're waiting for them to fall through. However, having said that, seller is obligated to disclose any kind of defects that were discovered. So let's say there were defects discovered during the first buyer's home inspection, and maybe they corrected them. Maybe they addressed them. That has to be disclosed to the second buyer.
Okay. So then as a buyer agent, then you would be able to let them know, to the buyers that are there waiting for this to happen, you can let them know, hey, this is what was found. These are the problems. Do they get informed that they were corrected?
Yes, they need to. And as a matter of fact, the seller should go back and change their seller's disclosure statement to reflect any repairs that were done during that period of time.
Okay. All right. So actually in a backup position, you could close quicker because you can get rid of a lot of stuff if your buyers are already aware there was things.
You could, yeah.
It's
very possible that in the backup position, buyer's willing to say, hey, listen, it sounds to me the home inspection's already been done, repairs have been done. We're willing to fly through the home inspection, and let's get right into getting an appraisal to satisfy our lender and get to closing early.
I got a question, because I understand that the buyer owns the home inspection.
Correct.
So in that situation, can the backup buy the home inspection from the previous bidder, from the previous
right
buyer?
That's a great question, Bill. That is a really good question. So
that will help
possible.
Time,
Yeah, it's possible. That's a discussion that the previous buyer has to have with the home inspection person. It's possible. There are some home inspectors that will release that. And there are a few that won't, because in their E&O insurance, it only covers the one that they're in contract with for the home inspection. But there are some home inspectors that will release that. They'll release it to the seller even. That needs to be a discussion that customer of the home inspector needs to have with their home inspector and get permission from them to release that home inspection.
And to me,
that's a great question. And it can happen. I've seen it happen.
To me, that would be an interesting situation because, for example, a home inspection that we did on one place, there was a lot of stuff that had to be repaired, and all of those repairs were basically you just got to do all of it. On the other home inspection, there were a lot of repairs that the buyer said, I can do that. Don't even worry about it. I mean, like paint here, a door here, there, whatever. And he was like,
Right.
I don't care, don't worry about it. So they only picked 2 things out of everything that they wanted done.
Right.
And so the only thing that was given to the seller was just those 2 things. If the seller was given the entire report, now they'd have to disclose all those other things, wouldn't they?
Yes. If the seller had knowledge, and this is why we don't want to deliver the inspection report to the seller, and this is why the seller does not want the full inspection report, because if they receive the full inspection report, they now have knowledge of all those material defects, and that has to be disclosed. And that's why that language is written in our disclosures and in our contract that as buyer's agents, selling agents, we will not deliver that, because it really puts the seller at a disadvantage if that first sale falls through. Now seller is stuck with this information about the condition of the home, these material defects. They have to disclose that. Yeah. Well, I hope this has been helpful. It's always a great, I love getting together with you guys and talking through contracts. I know it's a kind of a geeky thing, but I enjoy it. And I'm always learning something new. It's always an opportunity, working with all the agents in their office and, kind of learning through their eyes and through their experience of things that they're struggling with. So I'm hoping that you find this helpful. If you ever have any questions about our forms, anything like that, feel free to reach out to me, text me, email me, give me a call, and I'd be more than happy to answer those questions for you. Okay?
All right. Thank you very much. It was very, very instructive.
Good. Thank you, Bill. I'm glad
Thanks
it was.
a lot, Ron. Sorry
Good
for
to see
any
you,
questions,
Richard.
but
Yeah, thanks, Ron.
All right. Well, you guys all have a good evening, and hopefully we'll see you around the office or see you online again.